Thanks for joining us. I'm Randall Bennett. Twitter's had a few problems that were characteristic of the early days of email, but now will that trust, well, you have to double check every link you're about to click. Let's talk about some vulnerabilities with Twitter cross-site scripting, and to do that we bring in two of the experts. We have Lance Ulanoff from PCMag.com. He's the editor-in-chief there. Lance, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Also, we have Kevin Toffel from JK on the Run. Kevin, thanks for being with us as well.
Thanks for having me.
So, briefly, a 17-year-old Brooklyn kid was bored, and he created a Twitter worm that spreads tweets from person to person. And if you click on one of these links, you become, quote, infected, although it's not like a traditional virus. It doesn't infect your computer. Instead, the person gains control of your account and furthers the worm forward. So in the past, Twitter links have been pretty reputable. People haven't had to worry about it. Lance, do you think that the culture of trust is changing on Twitter?
Yeah, well, of course it is, because the service is growing by leaps and bounds. It used to be like a little club. It was full of people who were really part of the technorati, the Web 2.0 crowd, and they were all pretty trustworthy because they were really more interested in furthering the technology than anything else. And now you've got, well, everybody from, your aunts and uncles getting on to celebrities. And I think it's changed the mix. The profile of Twitter has skyrocketed. And so, of course, when something like that happens, when you suddenly got 10 million people on a service, that's a pretty good target. The funny thing that you just said is that it's a 17-year-old kid who felt bored. That's like the early days of the PC, because that's who used to make malware, viruses, and things like that. Now it's organized crime. It is kind of a shame because, to your point, it's all about a web of trust. Obviously, once you lose that trust, once you feel like you can't forward along or can't retweet a tweet post, that's really going to undermine the value of the entire service.
I think it's interesting because, if you look at the early days of email, attachments were something that, you have no problem sending or receiving. And, now if you open an email attachment, you have to be 100% certain that email attachment is something that's valid. Kevin, do you think that, Twitter's kind of heading down that road where you're going to really have to make sure that, your friend is really sending you something valuable? Or do you think this is something that's inevitable that we should think about all the time anyway?
Well, I mean, I'm a fanboy of the cloud, so I tend to be a little more cautious, and even though I put myself out there, I do think that we need to be aware of this type of nuisance, annoyance, and I think the problem is, and Lance made some good points at how Twitter has skyrocketed in popularity and built such a big target audience now. I think the biggest problem here is that Twitter is part of that real-time web, and we have less time to react and think about, is this a good link, is this a bad link? We don't want to think about it, we just want to click and be real time, and maybe we all need to take like a 5-minute timeout in between when we see these links. I don't know.
I know.
I think Twitter
no 5-minute timeouts.
Yeah. Twitter obviously has some responsibility to its user base to keep people in the know if one of these worms is going on. That was one of the things that people kind of were a little bit frustrated with, was they weren't sure that the worm had happened until after it started trending on Twitter, and then people were like, oh look, the worm's happening. I mean, can you guys, either of you, think of any steps where Twitter could really step in and fix this, or should they kind of keep going the way they've been going?
So I think Twitter, the folks that run Twitter certainly did the outreach once they knew what was going on. They posted that message. The problem is that it's really hard to get ahead of these things. They're getting out there so quickly, but it is up to them to manage their service. It's funny, Twitter was built, and I always consider it a relatively simplistic service. They try and augment it in very small ways, but most of the cool stuff that you do on Twitter, you do with third-party applications.
Yeah.
So it wasn't built as a rich environment, and I feel like it was built a little bit like Swiss cheese. So there's going to be a lot of time here where people are going to find these holes and exploit them. So I'm hoping, just dropped out. Am I still there?
You're still here. Go ahead. Yeah.
So I'm hoping that Bizstone and company will spend a lot of time going through all of their code and making sure that it's as solid as it can be. But the other thing to think about is maybe it's time for security software to hop into sort of the short URL thing and the URL launching, and get in between that and your Twitter interface and read them before you launch them.
It's so interesting to think that security software, we've fought for years and years and years of this whole floppy disk-based culture where you take a floppy and you put it in your computer, and if you restart, it's going to break everything. And it's interesting to bring up that maybe security analysts have a role to help people be protected from the cloud. I don't know, Kevin, do you think, how do you think people can get involved to fix this?
I think raising awareness is the big issue, and really, if I'm not mistaken, this whole Mikey thing was really more of a nuisance to point out the exploit,
there was no actual damage.
Exactly. So, I mean, me personally, if I found an exploit, I'd probably go to the developers, but that's just me. I wouldn't be,
That's because you're not 17, so.
This is true. It wasn't that long ago. Well, maybe it was. But actually going back, Lance made a point about third-party apps, and that's where all the functionality is. I don't think I was touched by this thing mainly because I do use Twitter through third-party apps, especially on my iPhone. I'm constantly using Twitter phone, and I'm not going to get hit by this, I don't think.
Exactly, you're not. I mean,
that's exactly right.
Yeah. So
that's right. TweetDeck. I use TweetDeck all the time, and first of all, I don't go directly to anybody's profile page. I view profiles inside TweetDeck.
It's kind of interesting to think that most of Twitter's, like you were saying earlier, key features have been built. Even their Twitter search engine, right? That wasn't even built by them. That was built by a company that they acquired. I mean, I think Twitter really, to stay in this, they're going to have to be ahead of this. I'm hoping they'll figure out some way to do it. Let's move on to another topic that's hot right now. Of course, Apple always gets all the page views. Everyone's always looking for Apple news. Steve Jobs is nearing the end of his 6-month sabbatical. It's April. He should expected to come back in June. Maybe in time for a good iPhone launch. But in the meantime, he's still doing some strategy and architecture, according to the Wall Street Journal. They're saying that maybe he's helping out with that rumored Apple tablet, which I call the unicorn because I don't really think it exists. But, Steve Jobs obviously has been in ill health. Obviously, he's important to Apple. If you look at the last 10 years, for example. Kevin, do you think that maybe if Steve Jobs comes back, he should just stick to strategy, or do you think he's crucial to the day-to-day success of Apple?
Well, first of all, I hope that he does come back healthy or healthier.
Yeah.
Secondly, to answer your question, in my opinion, he's the face of Apple. Whether he's strategy, whether he's presenting, whether he's chairman, CEO, COO, whatever it is, I think he needs a very big presence in the company, at least for the time being. However, I don't want to, blindside or short-side rather Tim Cook, who's done a great job. Partially, I think, because the company could kind of be on almost autopilot to a degree. Not to downplay what the company's doing right now with Apple 3.0 for iPhone and potentially a new iPhone. But, I think Steve Jobs is at his best when he's in front of people. Whatever position that might be, it doesn't matter to me, as long as he can be up there and be part of the face of the company.
What do you think, Lance? Do you think he needs to be running the COO, signing off on all the documents, or do you think he's just better as a figurehead?
Well, that's a big leap there between figurehead and somebody signing off all the documents. I think Steve Jobs cannot stop himself from being involved. But I also, you were talking earlier to me about, he's been away for about 4 or 5 months, and everything's been fine.
Yeah.
But that's actually not a good measure of a successful CEO or COO, because development cycles are certainly much longer than that. A product roadmap is going to be 12 to 18 months. And that's where, while Steve Jobs is definitely the face of this company, I think that's where he's played a crucial role, is behind the scenes setting that roadmap and also making crucial decisions about products. I also wanted to talk about that whole tablet thing. I said on Twitter earlier today that Wall Street Journal article is literally being read like tea leaves. There isn't a tremendous amount of information in it, but it has spawned 1,000 stories.
Yeah.
And all of them are incredibly thin, because I know Apple. I talk to the people at Apple, but they don't actually talk to me, meaning that we have conversations, but nothing is said.
Yeah.
They don't tell me what products they're doing. They don't give me a product roadmap, and there's really virtually no one I can think of where they really do. So whatever Wall Street Journal is talking about is still, as they said, people familiar with the situation, close to the situation. That's not necessarily sources.
Yeah.
I agree. June, new iPhone. Will there be anything else? I don't know. Will Steve Jobs be standing on that stage? Totally dependent on his health. And
Definitely.
I don't know a thing about it. I wish the man so much good health. I hope he is well because he's important to the industry. It's important to Apple, but I have no idea.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to note, too, that when Steve comes back, whatever role he'll play, like you say, the Shuffle is really the only product that's been introduced in the last 6 months. That was a little bit of a tepid reception. I'm not sure that Steve Jobs would have helped the reception at all, but like you say, I think the test will really be once a full product cycle has gone through and once we have a little bit more of just a test of Tim Cook and the rest of the Apple crew. Lance Ulanoff, from PCMag.com, thanks for being with us. And also Kevin Toffel from JK on the Run, always a pleasure. Kevin, I think you're our second repeater, so it's a privilege, right?
Do I win a prize?
Yeah, exactly. You should. That is it for this show. I'm Randall Bennett, TechV.com for everything TechV, and we're on iTunes.